So, Nick, I would like to understand how has hiring for tech roles evolved during pandemic?
Well, I think and that's a great question to start off with, because after doing this for 20 years, the pandemic is definitely new and unique. Um, First of all, it's been nice because now we can go into video calls. Prior to that, a lot of times you're trying to set up coffee dates, phone calls, on-site meetings. So there's a good and plus. The plus is it's easier to meet people. They're working at home. They don't have to work away from their desks. You don't have to make night calls or early morning calls. The other side of that, the tough side of that, is they're talking to more recruiters. People are reaching out more. And as a result, what we're seeing is we have to connect with 3 to 5 times more candidates to get to a hire compared to a year ago. So even though the market is more robust and it's easier to get a hold of candidates, you got to talk to more candidates because because of that influx from recruiters. And there's a lot of noise in the industry. Obviously, there's a lot of people that don't have the skill set that are calling randomly just to kind of get numbers up, and that's causing a little bit where you have to really reach out a couple more times than you normally do. I think the other side of it is because of the marketplace, it's not 1 or 2 touches with your candidate. You have to constantly stay in touch and be selling that candidate. We've seen it much like in the .com boom, where you really have to get your candidates all the way to their job, to their starting date, and stay in touch with them after that, because you never know when someone's going to reach out with their dream job and want to move them away. So that constant communication is key. And I think the other thing is 2 other pieces to that is remote. Obviously, that has created a new paradigm for candidates. So you really have to understand what that lever is. If they're going to want to go fully remote, if they're open to a hybrid type of model moving forward, and if they're open to going back on site, because everybody has finding different nuances with each one of those. So making sure you understand the levers with the candidates, and then on the other side of that, that allows us to expand our pool of candidates, right? So I've been recruiting in the Seattle and Northwest for 20 years up and down the coast, but now we're recruiting across the country when we have remote roles as well. And so we have that, again, that plus and minus situation. Hey, great news, I have a bigger pool of candidates. The other side of that, though, I have longer days, right? Because now I'm recruiting on the East Coast in the morning, the West Coast. So your days aren't 8 to 5 because of your time zone. Your days are across East Coast to Pacific time. So there definitely is some nuances that has added to it, some great things, but some other things that you have to be aware of.
Okay, so would you say that hiring has become more expensive for companies?
I don't think it's become more expensive. I think it's become more, it's not a commodity.
Mhm.
Before, I think a lot of times it was more of a quantity driven hiring. Hey, if we agencies, 60 phone calls, interviews, submittals a week, and it's very quantity driven. Now, because of the cost, I think it's sharpened up the profession to more quality driven, if that makes sense. Hiring is still hiring. People have been paying fees, but the cost of talent is kind of the same, but the cost of finding that talent and the resources have maybe had an impact, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And that gets me to my next question, Nick. Uh, I've seen a lot of recruiters and hiring managers struggling to find the right talent, especially tech talent when it comes to software engineering or data science or data analyst job roles. So what tips do you have for recruiters or companies who find it extremely challenging to attract tech talent?
Well, I think one of the things you have to do is understand the market and understand the direction, right? So yes, it's hard to attract great talent, but I think you have to change the way you're going after that talent. And the way we've done it is if you look back, everyone looked at agencies and staffing, and hey, if I talk to enough people, I'm going to get to the right talent. We've changed that. We've changed it to more of a solutions consulting situation. So at Flawless, one of the things that you want to do is we've really pivoted our recruiters in terms of personal development, become more of a talent advisory training, right? To become more the virtual interviewing, understanding, when you virtual interview, sometimes you don't get the chemistry and that emotional piece that you're looking for. And you need to kind of pull that out in terms of how this candidate's going to evolve and work well with another company. The onboarding and the internal mobility is important. So you really train your recruiters from become a recruiter to more of a talent advisor, consultant, solution provider. You came from Deloitte, so that consultative approach is a lot different with your client than, oh, let's drop in a staffing contractor to fill a need. And that's where I think the big change is that we found the demand for recruiting services has changed over the last 12 months, where we realize that it is very competitive, but agencies under the whole paradigm of quantity over quality is not delivering. They spread the risk, but they accept too many job orders. Therefore, they don't have, they have very broad but no depth. And you have hiring managers on the other side also looking at 100 resumes when they should be looking at 6 or 8 qualified resumes. And then, so they're slow to hiring. The ROI on both sides, the business side, because managers losing a lot of time, and on the agency side, with the time involved. So what we're doing is we really believe in dedicated services providing better results. So, we've moved to more of a dedicated recruiter to take on 3 or 4 key roles, right? So he can work directly, or it could be an RPO model, what we call recruiting as a service, where we have our recruiters working only with one client. On that client, understanding their processes, what they're looking for, their showstoppers, and be able to get them through the candidate through a seamless process. Because one of the things that happens a lot of times is with an agency, you're putting a candidate out into the market, time can kill that deal as well, as some companies can move fairly quickly, other companies take 2 to 3 weeks. So if you're involved with the client, you can help usher that process through. So I think the dedicated recruiting piece, more senior recruitings, understanding that recruiting is a profession, not something where you bring someone in, if they make enough phone calls, something will happen, right? And training them through that profession. And that's one of the things that we've been able to do, is bring on people that have 5 to 7 years recruiting experience, and then adding to that in terms of the combination of an art and science around recruiting, adding that value add as a solution. Because as you get into diversity hire, that's another piece. You can say diversity hire, but do you know how to go about that, right? And that's one of the things that we do with talent mapping. We have a data science. It's one of the partners on staff that helps us really build that out, so we can present that to the client, say, we know you want to diversify hire. This is the type of talent in those categories. This is the type of talent that would, are women engineers, or Black engineers, Latino engineers, whatever that may be. And we're able to, help them understand better what that market looks like.
That's very helpful, Nick. So Nick, as you mentioned that you provide recruiting as a service, right? And you told me in our last conversation that you help some really renowned companies out of Bay Area and across the US hire tech talent. And I'm sure as soon as these very renowned companies post any job position for software engineers or data scientists, there's an influx of applications, right? And whenever I talk to any recruiter, I always ask, okay, what's your biggest challenge? One of your biggest challenge, right? And they always tell me, I think it's very difficult to shortlist 5 good candidates out of 1,000 applicants. how do you deal with the situation? And I'm sure you must receive a lot and a lot of applicants, right?
We see that a lot, and what we try to coach and the company culture is around a positive candidate experience, and that's the key. That's a key foundation. If a candidate, you're going to get candidates that obviously did not read the job description and are way off center from what the job is, and the positive candidate experience is you pretty much ignore that type of candidate. There's no reason to reach out. If they have a minimum qualifications, maybe they're 2 years out of the market, but they're not quite qualified for the senior that we're looking for. We have an automatic response mechanism to that as well. And then on the third part, if they're possible, they kind of meet. We want to have a 10 to 15 minute conversation with them. We want to give them a good experience. We want to understand where they are, because they may be part of our network moving forward. They may be a possible candidate in the future. So, the whole thing is that positive candidate response, that positive candidate experience, if you will, as opposed to just ignore. Our recruiters have been out there for years, so it doesn't take them a long time to really go through and see if this candidate is a candidate that's just totally off the mark, a candidate that's, hey, this candidate is not quite qualified, but let's make sure we stay in touch. This candidate's worth a 10 to 15 minute phone call. And then, candidates that may look good, we're going to have a longer phone calls to see if they're viable and they're a candidate that's eligible and qualified to submit. So part of that goes back to the fact of having more senior recruiters, as opposed to junior recruiters where they're talking to people and they don't quite understand that, the difference between a full stack engineer or a platform engineer or a back-end engineer, and try to get that through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's very helpful. So Nick, as you mentioned, right, that out of this thousands of applicants, right, you try to stay in touch with some of the candidates that even if you don't decide to move forward with them, I think it can be a great strategy for any company or any recruitment team, right? You never know about your future hiring needs. You may need to hire a lot of entry-level candidates at any point. How do you stay in touch with them? I mean, do you invite them to some event? Is it a newsletter? Or because, for candidates, it's very easy to jump from one company to another and forget easily about yourself.
I think that's a two-sided thing. That's up to the I always encourage my candidates, and our company does to even though I don't have an opportunity for you at this time, use me as a resource. I've been doing this for 20 years. One of the things I let candidates know is to apply online is buy a lotto ticket. Because you're applying online, you're hoping something sticks, that you get filtered in. Because when you apply online, they get thousands of candidates, and the application is to filter you out, not filter you in. So if there's a reason for you to be out, they're going to let you out. Whereas with us, we're looking for the reason to filter you in. We're looking for that conversation where you're going to be the fit for this client. And I tell my candidates, even if you're not a fit for this job, stay in touch with me. You might run across an opportunity with a client that looks like a great fit. Well, instead of reaching out cold or through web, reach out through your network and say, hey, do you know anyone there? Because that's where the jobs are, through those connections. We may not be working with them, but we may know someone within Microsoft, for example. Let me set up an introduction for you. Now you have a warm connection and not a cold one and a hope, if that makes sense. So I encourage it both ways. I encourage it for my candidates to reach out to me. On a monthly basis, we're constantly sending out feeds within our team on new hires, on new companies we're working with, to try to, get, to our first degree candidates, to allow them to be up to date on what we're working on. So that's kind of part of it, is to make sure that when you do connect with the candidate, you want to get that first degree connection, because then you can share your posting, the news, the updates, and everything that's going through it. And on the other side of it, when we have new roles, we have our list where I may talk to a candidate that's he's not really wants to relocate out of Seattle. He wants a Seattle opportunity. I don't have one that fits, but now next week I do. Well, I'm going to hit all those people with my list. Say, hey, this is a new job I just picked up. But the encouragement, as far as from our perspective too, is the candidate needs to reach out. The candidate needs to stay in touch because the market's ever changing. I have candidates come back to me from, I placed 10 years ago, hey, Nick, I just want to touch base. I'm not looking, but if something comes up along these lines, please reach out. I've had candidates, OPT candidates that all of a sudden find a job, but then now they're starting to get the experience they're looking for and they're ready to look for other ones. So, it's more like, hey, we're the radar out there for you because you're working. Let me know what you're looking for, and if those come up, we'll definitely reach out to you. So I see that as a two-way partnership, and that's part of it, not a transaction. When I talk to someone, I don't look at it as a transaction. I look at it as another partner within my network.
Nick, I think this is a great point that I haven't heard, by the way, from this many recruiter, that you also refer candidates to like other opportunities if something is not available immediately in your radar, which is great. So I think I would recommend every single job seeker, anyone who's looking for a job change, to definitely stay in touch with you or reach out to you, because as I said, it's a bi-directional process. Definitely, it can be very, very helpful for them. So Nick, as we have talked about like challenges in identifying right tech talent, when it comes to diversity, I think it becomes even more challenging. Every time I talk to any recruitment team, any company, and they say, okay, helping with hiring is great, but also can you help us identify diverse talent? What advice do you have for all the recruiters and the companies out in the market?
Well, that is a big buzzword right now, right? Diversity, and companies, the boards are pressing the C-levels, and the C-levels are pressing the managers to make sure that there is diversity, at least being interviewed, in a lot of times. But I think the education of that comes about as well. And where we do well, and I think we're kind of ahead of the game, is not only do we have tools and some tools are out there for everyone else to use, but we take it another level in terms of looking for diversity talent. We can single in on a region, on a city, and a state within a talent pool for a particular job rec experience level. But we also have a data scientist, like I mentioned, as one of the partners within Flawless. And she is able to take the mapping and the data that we have and build, heat maps, talent mapping maps, where we can sit there and say and identify, how many women are in Seattle that are 5 to 7 year software engineers, and how that's going to equate to this particular company and their ability to hire. So we can better educate the client on what their minimums and maximums are going to be able to bring in the diversity. In some situations, they may come out with a job description, then you may find that there's only, there's about 10 to 12 people that meet this description here right now. And you're fighting against Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. And where do you think you're going to fit? So let's kind of relook at that and help them understand what the market looks like. So I think diversity is something that you look at, but you also need the information and the education behind it to see if it's not something that's just being driven down by a board member that read the news clip and says, hey, we need to make a diversity hire. Okay, great. But let's look at that. Let's look at that in more detail and at the ground level. And can we make those type of hires? Does that make sense?
No, definitely. That's very, very helpful. And I think it will be helpful for every one who's in hiring or recruiting space. So thank you so much, Nick, for your time, for sharing your advice and insights on